talking about Bitcoin going to tens of millions of dollars is what gets the most clicks. And, I mean, and I do genuinely believe these things. I think that's the distinction of where I do my best to not cross that line when it comes to, let's say, sensational engagement. That's where I try to not cross the line, is everything I say, I genuinely believe, right? Like I try to, again, this is more just speaking. I like to hear what you think too, Robin, but like for me, I never say, oh, I know Bitcoin's going to this date and these charts prove why. I never try to pin those things because I don't know that. I don't necessarily believe that, right? But the things I do say are like, yeah, I do think Bitcoin's going to hundreds of millions of dollars a coin. I do think that in nominal terms, obviously, but in real terms, I think that too, if you wait long enough, and I do think that 1% of a Bitcoin is going to be enough to retire on. I don't know when, but I think that's going to be possible, right? I mean, if there's roughly a quarter of a million or a fifth of a million Satoshis on average per person with an equal wealth distribution, like why would 5 times that number not be enough to retire, right? Like I think that makes total perfect sense, especially again, because we've less in common with the future and the past. The other thing we have to keep in mind here is that AI is accelerating, the world's automation is accelerating, robotics is accelerating, and the majority of labor hours are in front of us, not behind us, right? And this is something I think people are really underestimating with robotics and AI, is that the AI does not have to be better than humans. The robots do not have to do things better than humans. They just have to be more economically efficient, right? My time is finite. I'm painfully reminded that every day. I can maybe only work 3,000 hours a year if I really push myself, right? Likewise with you, Robin. Like maybe 3,000 hours, 1,500 hours if you're trying to be more sustainable, right? Maybe 4,000 if you go like, if you want to burn out in 6 months, try going 4,000 hours a year, right? But with the robot or with an AI, like it can work all day, every day, right? Perpetually for years, right? Only needing to stop to recharge. It's going to work at a higher efficiency rate than people. It's going to probably work more hours. So anyway, point being that if there's a quarter of a million Satoshis per person, if distributed equitably, which it won't be, and 4 times that number is 1% of a Bitcoin. And oh, by the way, what happens 50 years from now when there are 5 billion working adults, but 20 billion working robots and AIs or softwares or whatever, right? Like at that point, 80, 90% of the labor is not going to be human, so to speak, and even if that's off by a couple of decades, like, yeah, I think for somebody watching this, if they're in their 30s, 40s, 20s, teenage years, I mean, I think 1% of a Bitcoin is going to be enough to retire. And so should you stop at 1% of a Bitcoin? No, obviously. Like get 1 Bitcoin if you can, get 10 Bitcoin if you can, right? And it's not too late for those things. A lot of my clients are going from 0 Bitcoin to 10 Bitcoin within their first few months, right? Obviously, these are people that have already saved up money and this and that, the other. But for some people, it's still possible to get to 10 Bitcoin with relative ease. 100 Bitcoin's pretty much priced out unless you're already a multi-deca millionaire. Which, obviously is not horribly common. But, even for the average person, I think it's still possible to get to 1 Bitcoin, half a Bitcoin, even if you only get to a fifth of a Bitcoin. That's still a fifth of a Bitcoin, 0.2 Bitcoin, or let's say 0.21, because that's a more fun number, right? That's 1/100 millionth of the network, right? It's like 1/100 millionth of owning the future 20 years from now. It's like, yeah, I think I'm going to be able to retire on that, right? Because there's way more than 100 million people in the world, right? So, 1/5 of a Bitcoin, 0.2 Bitcoin, that's 20 times a million sats. A million sats is 4 to 5 times the number of Satoshis for the average person. The internet took, 30, 40, 50 years to reach the level of adoption it's reached. Bitcoin's accelerating a little faster than that. So, if Bitcoin takes even if it takes another 30 years to become a significant percentage of global wealth. Like, anyway, point is that I think no matter how you slice it, like any amount of Bitcoin you're buying today, like you're going to be fine. You're going to be able to retire. But yet, all the same, we keep clicking on this content because we feel like it's too good to be true, because we've been stolen from so much with political currency, right? Like people with 10 Bitcoin will still click on the video saying, all you need is 0.1 Bitcoin to retire, right? Even though they have an amount 100 times that, Like they will still click on that video because we have been emotionally traumatized and emotionally damaged by this fraud of political currency. It's that we just can't help ourselves. As much as we would like to think we care about, oh, I'm going to watch this video by Luke Broyles about the human cost of money, or oh, I'm going to watch this video about, the philosophies of freedom in Bitcoin or self-sovereignty. That it's like we don't, at the end, like, just the brutal truth is that we really just don't care. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, that it tricks people into caring, right? And so people can complain about clickbait as much as they want, but Bitcoin itself is clickbait, right? It clickbaits you in your own self incentives, and haha, bait and switch. Guess what? Now you actually care about other people too, right? Or you always cared about people, but now your interests aren't in conflict with their interests, and everybody can win because this is not a zero sum game. And by the way, political currency is the opposite form of clickbait, right? You do political currency because it sounds like the easy route, but it turns out it's actually the hard route. So anyway, just more ramblings, I guess. But yeah, it's just very interesting how and in 10 years this is going to be totally different, right? In 10 years, people are going to be talking about 1,000,000 Satoshis is the new goal, right? Eventually 100,000 Satoshis, I think, will be the new goal, right? Even though, it's 250,000 Satoshis per person. Like, I do not think most people will ever have 100,000 Satoshis. I think a couple decades from now, like, people just starting into Bitcoin will, say, hey, I can buy 50,000 Satoshis right now. I can DCA in another few thousand sats a month or whatever, and maybe I'll get to 100,000 sats someday. Like, I genuinely think that's where this is going, because I don't think the math, I don't think the math suggests otherwise. These Bitcoin treasury companies have amassed almost 1 million Bitcoin. Maybe they can get up to 4 or 5 million Bitcoin over the next few years if they really push hard. But then, okay, what if America wants 1 million Bitcoin, right? We have whatever, 200,000 coins or so, 91, 92,000, whatever it is, have to go to Bitfinex, assuming that we actually follow through with that, right? I mean, like, where are those 1 million Bitcoin going to come from? Maybe the treasury companies, you can speculate against that. Maybe somewhere else, you can speculate against that. Maybe a lot of it's paper. We don't know, but the point is we do know that most people are never going to have 250,000 sats. Most people, I think, are never going to have 100,000 sats. And so the only reason we keep clicking on the videos with a $10 million Bitcoin price or 0.01 Bitcoin help you retire, the only reason we keep clicking on that is because that's where that is meeting people where they are. And where people are that they are disenfranchised and they are stolen from and they are emotionally traumatized by a political currency system with a massive human cost. The people's drive to click on the number go up videos is a symptom and inevitable obvious thing that's the result of the human cost of political currency, right? So anyway, I think the irony is that people can complain on my videos about the human cost of money, but the reason why people aren't watching this and they're watching the number go up is proof that you're wrong and that actually there is a massive human cost. It's because we're our whole lives we've been traumatized by this, and thankfully now we have Bitcoin, where in time more and more people realize that they don't have to be traumatized by this.
That's super interesting, and actually sums up a lot of my thoughts that I have around that topic, because I do play a lot with those titles. I do it with 0.1 Bitcoin. We recently had some retirement calculator on where we talked about 1.9 Bitcoin. And the truth is it depends on your time frame and it depends on your situation. So, and I get many different comments saying, like, if I put in 1.9 Bitcoin, a kid in India sitting there and watching and saying, hey, I can never get to 0.1 Bitcoin. That's out of reach for me. And then when I put 0.1 Bitcoin in there, someone, a Pratt in New York says like, oh, that's laughable. Anything under 10 Bitcoin and you're a poor person. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's very extreme, but it depends so much on the time frame and on the context of the person. So any title like that is just to provoke a click, and then in the video it's more context. And I see a lot of people also, I mean, that's just me rambling as a creator, that clearly haven't watched the video and still commenting, which is really funny because you sometimes read in the comment, yeah, you haven't watched the first 5 minutes even. Like you clearly, you either completely didn't understand what we were saying or you just didn't watch it. So it's super interesting because those are the people that complain about why we do those thumbnails, but at the very time they're clicking on those thumbnails and giving the algorithm the signal that they want to see more of those. So if the YouTube algorithm sees, hey, you're clicking always on the zero point 0.1 Bitcoin videos and you're commenting, because this means another signal for the YouTube algorithm to give you more of those videos, you actually will have a feed full of 0.1 Bitcoin videos. Funny enough, when I look at my YouTube feed, I don't have any of those videos because I don't click on them. I watch other stuff, but I produce what I liked, what I think my audience would like. I'm audience driven always, with titles, with thumbnails, with the content. I analyze each and every one of my guests and see how long people are watching, because this is for me an indicator how interesting the guest was for my audience. And I, for example, saw with Luke that people were really interested. Like, people really enjoyed watching and watched a long time, more than on average. I don't know the exact numbers, but I re-invited you because of that reason. So my podcast is purely audience driven from every point of view, and the type of guests that I hear, the titles that I produce, those are all because I know people like to see that. It's also a little bit, of course, my personal preference. Like, I wouldn't re-invite someone that I don't like or that I had a bad time with. But those are usually also the people that people don't really watch. And there's a lot of subjectivism still in there. But mostly I try to serve the community and serve the audience. And how can I serve the audience? Listen to them. What are they clicking on? What are they watching? And this is the types of things that they're clicking on. These are the types of things they're watching. And yeah, that's super interesting for me. And this whole retire thing, I think it's super interesting, and we can dive deep in that. But it's very contextual. Like, it's very, you basically have to sit down with a person, or where you're living, what are your expected expenses in the future? Do you need to take care of kids? And like, you have like 200 questions that you need to ask someone before you can even give someone an answer. And they want an answer of like, oh, like, where do I have to get to? Yeah, like, just stack harder. Like, that's a real answer. Just like, stack as hard as you can. And if you already have a good amount, maybe it's time to enjoy life also, because Bitcoin is not everything, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have to understand that we all have to understand and remind ourselves, we do not think rationally. I do not think rationally. I I'm aware of that so much, right? And I think anybody that is self-conscious is aware of how they are not thinking rationally. It's something I see. We're talking about Bitcoin content, which is a lot of what I do, but also my line of work. I see this all the time. I'll have somebody reach out to me. They'll have one coin and they'll say, "Oh, Luke, you're a scammer because you're charging a 1% fee." Right? Because our whole business model is we help people stack more Bitcoin, right? That's what we try to do, right? And so as long as we're helping people reduce the risk by 1% and get ideally at least 1% more Bitcoin, then we're happy because we have a solid business model, and they're happy because they're ending up with more Bitcoin, right? But anyway, point being that, like, I'll have people reach out to me with one Bitcoin, and they will complain of paying our company $1,000. If Bitcoin's 100 grand, 1%, $1,000, whatever, right? But then other people with like 50 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoin or more, like, they'll be happy to pay us, right? I had lunch with one of my clients yesterday, and he's got a couple hundred Bitcoin, and we're going to help him make a few dozen coins over the next probably 12 months or so. He's happy to pay us 1%, right? Because to people at that point, like, he wants to live his life, right? And there's lots of people like that, lots of other people like that, right? He's fine with me sharing that story, but like, the point is that people just don't think in a non-zero sum game mindset, and the main reason why people don't again, the problem here is that zero sum mindset. People are so stuck in this system of thought of the fiat fraudulent system that they're terrified of spending $1,000, because they don't see the value of a $10,000 or $50,000 value on the other end of that, right? I mean, the smaller the stack, the easier it is to help them get a larger percentage return, right? All the time, I've helped people with 1, 3, 5, 10 Bitcoin increase your stack on average 70%. So obviously, the smaller the stack, the easier it is in general to help. Not always though, because the more Bitcoin somebody has, the more unique opportunities they get, right? Like, a lot of my wealthier clients, they get offers and opportunities to use products before they come to the general market, to invest in Bitcoin treasury companies before they IPO, those kinds of things. So not necessarily does it get harder to help people with more Bitcoin on a percentage term stack more Bitcoin, but everything has this nuance. But the larger point here is that people aren't thinking rationally, and the political currency system, the zero-sum game mindset of fiat, I think is one of the main contributors to people not thinking rationally. And maybe to marry these two ideas that we've been talking about of this, how much Bitcoin to retire on versus number go up, or versus the human cost, right? Number go up versus the human cost. Like one of the things I think is a cool way to think about it, once people understand both of these, is that no matter how you look at it, there are less Bitcoiners than Bitcoins, right? Like we have less in common with the near future in the past. For the entirety of Bitcoin's history, from 2009 probably until 2030, there are going to be more Bitcoins than hardcore Bitcoiners, right? And I think that's how you can know that the average number of Satoshis for the average person in the world, roughly 230, 240,000 Satoshis, whatever it is, you can know that's going to be a stupid amount of wealth, because there are less than 21 million people actively in Bitcoin right now. And yet 1 Bitcoin is basically unaffordable for the majority of those Bitcoiners, right? Like there's not 21 million people in Bitcoin who 100 grand or 150 grand is just chump change to them, right? And so like right now, if you equally distributed the number of, if you look at that ratio, like then you can know looking forward in the future, it's the same concept, right? Right now, there's an average of way more than a whole Bitcoin for every single person in Bitcoin fighting for it, right? It's unattainable for most people in Bitcoin, right? Like sure, for let's say the 5 million people are in Bitcoin over, sure, for like a million of them, this is, it's not a lot of money, but for the majority of them, it's a lot, right? My point is, it's the same thing in the far future, when instead of a few million Bitcoiners, there's a few billion Bitcoiners. It's the same thing. At that point in time, sure, there will be on average 250,000 Satoshis per user of the network. However, I genuinely believe that 250,000 Satoshis will be unaffordable to the vast majority of the people in the network, right? And if you don't believe me, or you think that's just some clickbait bullish hopium, right? Like I said earlier, I do the clickbait too, but I never make it anything I don't genuinely believe. And I think the evidence as to why 250,000 Satoshis is eventually life-changing, potentially generational wealth in the future is because we see the same thing today. There are more Bitcoins than Bitcoiners. And so the average number of coins per Bitcoiner is multiple whole coins. If you think there's 5 million hardcore Bitcoiners, I think it's probably a realistic number. MicroStrategy is about 800,000 shareholders. Metaplanet has about 130,000, 7 million users of the Bitcoin Reddit, 4 million users of or followers of Michael Saylor. Like, yeah, I think 5 million is probably a good number of hardcore Bitcoiners around the world. Okay, the average Bitcoin per user is like about 4 Bitcoin. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 6. I don't know. But like, I don't know. Most people watching this don't have necessarily 4 Bitcoin, right? Some people watching this have 400 Bitcoin, right? But most people don't have 4, right? And so we can know that about the future because we already see it today. And the other thing that I think is really cool to think about is that, let's say over the next 100 years, Bitcoin helps prevent the needless death or loss of 21 million lives, right? I think that's very, very attainable, right? If right now the human cost of political currency is 10 million people, right? Let's say the total number of people dying that don't need to die is 20 million a year. That's probably reasonable. Let's say half of that's fiat money, 10 million. Okay, let's say Bitcoin helps reduce half of that. Okay, that's 5 million lives a year over the course of 100 years. That's 500 million people. Let's, take a small percentage of that, right? Let's take 5 or so percent of that, or 21 million people, right? It's like quite literally, Bitcoin is stupid cheap for no other reason that it's going to have a humanitarian impact large enough over a long enough time span that like Bitcoin's going to save more lives, or at least prevent more deaths than there currently are people in Bitcoin. So not only do I think that it's reasonable to say that the average Bitcoiner is going to have a second, third, or fourth order effect of preventing a death, 50 years in the future, right? Not only is that, I think, something really exciting to think about, but of course, then the other obvious thing is number go up, right? It's like, of course, Bitcoin's number of users is going to double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, because that's how many lives we're going to prevent the deaths in the future, right? And the point is that if that just continues, like the brighter the human future gets for Bitcoin, the longer it survives, and therefore the greater the number go up, right? And so we're in this spot where people are debating of, oh, do I need 0.1 Bitcoin or 0.5 Bitcoin or 1 Bitcoin to be able to retire? And it's like having this conversation in 2010 with people saying, Luke, do I need 1,000 Bitcoin or 5,000 Bitcoin to retire, right? And it's like you're the biggest problem in Bitcoin today is that people are not bullish enough. They're not bearish enough on the human cost of political currency, and they're not bullish enough on just moderate percentages, right? You don't have to eradicate hunger overnight, right? You just have to turn an annual 1% change into a 2% change. You don't have to create all these new miracle medicines, right? You just have to accelerate the rate of science from 1% a year to 2%, right? You don't have to quote unquote fix the planet and climate change and this and that or whatever the heck that means, right? All you have to do is increase energy efficiency for the bottom 3 billion people of the world, right? Because that's where most of the waste, I don't want to say waste, that's where most of the toxic emissions come from. It's from the poorest sections of the world, right? Not because they're irresponsible, but just because if you're going to choose between thinking about the environment 20 years in the future versus feeding your kids, you're going to choose feeding your kids, right? So it's this zero-sum toxic mindset that we can't have more people and, we're a cancer on our planet, right? It's these kinds of toxic mindsets that keeps people limited. And then also, I would think, in effect, limits them in this zero-sum thinking and thinking about, oh, well, I only have 0.1 Bitcoin. I need to gamble my way into getting half a Bitcoin. Then I can think about retirement. It's like, no, like, sure, you got to give it time. Of course, the question is time. The less time you expect to live into the future, the more Bitcoin you need, obviously, to be able to buy your time back the sooner. But, if you're in your 40s, if you're in your 30s, like, you don't need a lot.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.